Okay, I think we are live now. So I'd like to welcome you both, John and Nathan. You can start sharing your cameras if you prefer to do so. The floor is yours to start this presentation. Thank you again for joining us in this edition of Matomo Camp.
Wonderful. Good morning. It's dark and early here in North America, but we're very happy to join you. The important question that I want to begin today is to ask John. John, what are you drinking? What are you drinking?
I am, of course, drinking our house label Insightful Beans.
Oh, and I'm drinking our house label Insightful Tea. But actually,
I've got this very fashionable mug for it.
Wonderful. See, what's important about the work we do, and we're going to be having a little fun this morning since it is Friday and early. We do like coffee and tea, and I hope we'll talk about that later because we make our own branded coffee and tea. It is early, but John and I are happy to always talk about our work on privacy related to measurement and telemetry and analytics. And that's what we're here today. And what we'll be having a conversation back and forth, kind of reminding ourselves of how we've got here and some of the projects where we've used Matomo and decided we need more privacy than kind of what you get out of the box. So that's what we're talking about. So I believe our slides are showing. Just want to make sure everyone can see our slides. I'm in the matrix.
We can see the slides. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. And I'm in the chat room. Everything's good. Okay. So we will proceed. So yeah, our talk this morning, maximizing privacy, or I think our short title was Privacy Maximus. This guy needs some more. Doesn't need any more coffee or tea. He's ready to go to maximize the benefits and protection of our community, the humans, the people that are, using our technology, our website, our service, our educational service, our government service. We want to think always of these people and kind of the reason they're coming to use some service and the reason we're using analytics in the first place. What is it? What is our goal? And what are potentially the unintended harmful side effects of kind of some of those things? So, John, what is our purpose and kind of, is that the framework for our conversation this morning?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start it. And it is never too early in the morning.
No. It's nice and quiet, in fact. Children and pets and spouses are still sleeping, which is always good.
My dog is a little bit suspect of this whole endeavor, but we'll see. Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about talking about this at Matomo Camp is that people get the privacy imperative, and we'll talk about hey, there are real privacy gains from Matomo. Some of those are going to be old hat for this crew, right? But there's also other things that hey, just because it beats the pants off of the surveillance capitalism analytics model, there's still a lot out there that you might want to protect against. And what are they? So we'll talk about how to do that using a couple of techniques. Of course, obligatory Clean Insights plug as a method, but let's talk about who is it that might want those protections? What might they look like? How should you think about that?
And the format of this conversation is a little bit based on our podcast, which I'll put in the chat room, at our organization Guardian Project, which is the parent organization for the work we do on privacy and security. And we call our podcast "What Are You Drinking?" Which is kind of an idiom. I don't know how well it translates around the world, but this idea of what are you drinking? Or what are you smoking? As another version of this, are you drinking the Kool-Aid? Are you drinking some fine wine? Are you drinking clean water? Are you drinking tea, coffee? it's it's an interesting discussion point we have on our podcast every other week, so you can always check that out as well. And and John, I lost your video.
No,
Still
I
there?
just have to coax it into refocusing, which usually involves restarting it.
So I think at the beginning of this, like when we're talking to people about even the work we do, and we're not going to do the whole backstory. I watched my talk from 2021 Matomo Camp, and I gave you the whole backstory of what we do. You can go find that online if you want that. But in general, the work we do in implementation is focused in a human rights and a humanitarian context. So we are working in war zones, we are working in natural disasters, we're working in refugee camps, in activist movements with journalists. These are places where people want products that work, and funders and people supporting us want to know, are we having an impact? Are people coming and using technology and services? But there's greater sensitivity around the context, I'll say. So yeah, so in general though, why do we want, when we go to people and say, hey, you're using Google Analytics, you're using Facebook, even you're using Adobe, all these kind of commercial systems we end up seeing, what are some of the value statements we start with, John, when we're trying to get people off of that particular kind of drink?
I mean, the real answer is almost all the people that we talk to are mission oriented, and they've got something already in their mind that they're out there to do for their users, and it is almost always aligned with the privacy imperative, right? Maybe we're talking to someone who's helping people get the news in a censored area, right? Like, hey, your users are at risk of getting busted for going around government censorship. Why would you want to expose their privacy or compromise it in any way? And they're like, no, like they're already on board. You talk to other groups, we got all sorts of vulnerable user populations. We've also got a bunch of populations that are choosing to be private. Say this is an encryption product. Well, that's a group that speaks a different language of privacy, and they're more likely to bring up a threat model and under what circumstances does it do this, that, or the other thing. But a lot of these groups already have something, and I would ask yourself, what is your mission anchor to begin with? What are you out there to do for your users, and start there. But of course, we've got our list up of like, even if you were running something very ordinary, right? Not nice to spy on people, and people don't like it, right? I don't think anybody really begrudges you for knowing that there are some statistics about your website. Hey, we have more visitors this month than last. But if I find out you're keeping a detailed dossier on me, like that's gonna make me feel weird. Um, there's
Well,
also
what's
just
interesting is often in the mobile context too, if you have sort of full tracking on, even with Matomo, down to IP address, you that metadata can be quickly paired with like a mobile subscriber info to like uniquely humanly identify someone in a legal case, or and so thinking about like, yeah, the difference between, I know how this person with this phone at this device ID on this time, precise date, what they did when they went through my site or my app, versus users from this country who have Android phones are now spending 20% longer, right? So that sort of level of understanding and insight, and what is the raw data behind that's stored on your servers or your Matomo server that's backing that. And that goes to the second point about leaks. I mean, this idea of people think, nope, I'm secure, everything's fine, no problem. But we see that even in the most secure companies, products and organization, that data leaks, exfiltration, corruption, all sorts of things ends up with data getting used, leaking out. So,
and this is one that like always feels like it can never happen to me until you've been around enough of them that it's just a matter of time. Uh, I had somebody tell me there's two kinds of people that ride motorcycles: those who have dropped it and those who are going to drop it. And I feel like that's the case with these leaks. I mean, I sit
Wait, what do
here.
you mean drop? Like they used to write it, or they'll drop the
Oh,
motorcycle?
drop like you're not even like a real crash, but like you're standing at a stoplight
Oh,
and you slip and you just set it down and you break the mirror off and you look like an idiot. And they're like, "Listen, it's gonna happen.
yeah.
Like
I do that
you
with
just
my
gotta suck it up.
e-bike.
It's not a who you are thing. It isn't I would never.
Right.
It's part and parcel with the territory. And I say this to you as, a person who in their past life had a fancy government clearance. These are like, the trove of some of the nation's biggest secrets. And my entire application that details everyone I know and anything that could have possibly been compromising about me was hacked. It's in the hands of presumably the Chinese government, among others now. There are no secrets anymore. And there's certainly no permanent secrets. If it's in your database, you gotta be really careful about what that means.
Yeah.
And I'll
Well, I
take
think
a
that,
moment to say
yeah.
that it's not just your analytics data. We're doing toxic asset audits for folks, and Nate could tell us more about those. But if you've got something in your database and that becoming public could endanger people, think again about collecting that in the first place.
And that the repurposing point and the subpoena point and the exfiltration point, these kind of all blend together. Repurposing means, well, you are collecting for one reason, and then someone higher level than you or your customer or an official says, "Oh, you have that data? That's really interesting. Could we use it for this?" Oh, like Google Maps, you store the history of people. Wait, could we use that to like figure out who was around a crime that happened, right? Or again, related to the fact, the specificity that by default, even something like Matomo can provide, can be repurposed. And, even if it's just repurposed for dark patterns, for targeted advertising, for things like that, that's something that we need to be careful about. And then subpoenas, I think subpoena is, a legal term for requesting of data. We're also working with, global organizations like UNICEF to say, hey, it's really great to store this data to help children have better services. But what if the situation in a place goes bad and then that data and the logging and the tracking related to it is legally, there's a new legal regime. So I think that's another thing to consider. But this last point, John, I think is most important here, the counterintuitive nature about less is more. What do you think about that?
So we're a bunch of analytics boffins, and we don't mind going deep on 100 different dashboards. But the fact is, most people in our organizations have the appetite for one at max. And what we end up throwing at them is whatever happens to maybe be on our curated front page dashboard, but often without context. And people end up just paging through tens of thousands of data points of nonsense most of the time. And they're looking for prophecies in goat entrails to an approximation, rather than saying, I actually have a real business question I came here to answer. I collected the data I actually needed. Here it is. It's designed to help me make a decision I've actually got to make. And the nice thing about not collecting absolutely everything from the get-go and creating this store of toxic data is you chose what you wanted to collect. And when you go look at that graph, it is clear as, well, I guess clear as night. It's a very clear night here. I can see the moon.
Stars at night, clear
Yeah,
as
it's as
the
clear as the
morning
stars at
star.
night
The
where
morning
you're
star.
trying to go, right? There's the North Star. That's our direction. Good, we're done. Because all of the data mattered to you. You chose to collect it.
So those are some of our driving kind of concerns, worries, morning stars, evening stars. We brought these then, we're trying to be very grounded today, grounded in our coffee, and freshly grounded in the actual implementations. I think last time I presented again in 2021 or 2022. By the way, Matomo Camp, we really enjoy being able to be part of this and learning from the wide variety of people out there working. I enjoyed some of the sessions yesterday on using the API and building different visualizations and dashboards. And I always love hearing about the massive deployments in some cases as well. So thank you, organizers. In that case, in 2021, I think we were talking, we might have brought up some of our implementations, but we have a little time now behind us with some of these. And I think we have two interesting ones to share this morning. And you, John, really helped the Mailvelope project implement and are still working with them on this. And as a background, Mailvelope was an interesting case for us because here is an application, a service that is available as a browser plugin that enables encrypted email within services like Gmail, right? Or any web-based email client or system can now use PGP encryption through this add-on. And so they're going in and saying, we're protecting you from these third parties and enabling additional privacy. How in the world did we get them to do ad tracking? And what value is that really providing them?
And I'd say we didn't get them to add tracking. We found out there was an important question they had about their own work. And
yes.
And this is a group, this is one I'm really proud that we were able to work with, because you talk about, I mean, Nate, you're a privacy and security guy. How often do you use PGP? For real. What percent of your
every day.
emails?
Oh,
Every
percent
day?
of my email? I sign like a third of my emails. Actually,
you encrypt?
a couple a day are like fully encrypted conversations on email. A couple a day.
And I think you probably represent the absolute razor's edge of the long tail on this, right? Like, PGP is not something a lot of people choose to use because it's been difficult. Mailvelope makes it easy, but their audience is people that really are going out of their way to make sure that they're private. They're saying, listen, I use these world-class, these products run by world-class security teams at Microsoft or Google or a number of reputable mail exchanges, but I want to wrap this in PGP because I need the privacy. So when you say to a group like that, hey, I have a measurement I want to take. In their case, it was, hey, listen, we work with 10 different webmail providers, and this is a browser extension. So making that UI work really well as someone else is constantly updating their product and making releases, it's very difficult for them. I said, well, which of these do we need to focus on? Are our users all on Gmail? Are they all on, mail.de? Where are they? And they really don't know because they launched this extension out into the universe. And here's silence, just this deafening silence. And it was like, okay, so what are people doing? And being able to sell to a group like that no, fear not. We're not taking any of that privacy that you came here for away, was tricky.
Yeah. And, this was that perfect case of our process, which we have on our website, but the idea of like, what is the insight? What do you specifically need to gain this insight? And how do we get there from a opt-in kind of consentful user experience that's very specific to the insight? So we're all driven through that process rather than ask permission to collect everything, look at what you have, and then figure out what you might learn from all the stuff you're collecting. So we really turn that on its head. And it's been wonderful working with Thomas and team at Mailvelope. And now we're getting feedback from users, and it's a constant learning process and seeing, kind of what's next. We've also, through working with Mailvelope and other communities like this project, Circulo, we've thought about even more ways to, what we call our just-in-time measurement, or a focus group approach. So Circulo is another one of these razor's edge cases of, we work with Article 19, a global human rights advocacy organization. They have specific projects in the world to support women journalists. throughout, who are not only face all of the challenges that journalists increasingly face in the world, but who are also women working in contexts where their physical safety or their, mental safety and health and anxiety are even, further um, at risk, and they are further targeted. So they have a specific program related to building solidarity, connections, community for women journalists. And this service we built, it's actually built on Matrix. It's a physical check-in and mental health check-in app. So you build a circle, you get all of these agreements, and everyone in that circle is ready to assist you either in the real world or digitally if you've been doxxed, if you're being followed, if you need help, if you need a request. And it's end-to-end encrypted. It's, we had no analytics, no tracking, no leaking of data, really designed thoughtfully and carefully. But then, of course, there are people funding this work, foundations, government projects, news organizations. And so they say, well, how many people are using it? Or is it working? Or where are users getting stuck? So in this case, rather than having that big dialog box saying, please accept all cookies and let us track you for everything, trust us, we decided we wouldn't show that ever. But what we added is in the application settings, an option to join a focus group. And so certain groups would go out to and say, look, we're going to compensate you with money, this community of women journalists. You're part of our product design. We'll pay you for your time, but you need to go into the app, join the focus group, and add this code. And the code identifies them as being part of a certain set of focus groups. And then for that period of time that they've opted in, they are sharing certain specific data about how they're using the app. Not everything. I think we do country level, maybe IP address, or not at all IP, but we indicate maybe their region. We indicate where they get stuck. We indicate, are they using the status color switcher for safe, not safe? And then they can disable that. And in fact, it's a certain period of time. So we have these different models and they got excited. A, we were compensating them with real money. B, they were helping make the product better. And, C, they knew it was only for a limited amount of time. And it made them feel kind of very positive and engaged as opposed to further targeted. What do you think about that, John?
The time bounding is something that I had never considered before I started working on this project. And it is one of the things that as we build these measurement plans, I feel best about. This is a group who a year from now, a week from now, 6 months from now, they're using this not on a lark. Like, this is an actual safety tool for them. And to say like, hey, I'm going to indefinitely track your activity, not only is it wrong, it's also not actually particularly helpful for us. We come in with a question we want to ask. We come in with a defined period. We get our answer. We move on, and we're not collecting this permanent, even if it's minimal in our case, dossier on people. And it, as we've designed measurement plans, it's so nice because you go, listen, what is the question? When do I want to make the decision? Let's gather it. Let's move on. And then our users get this sense of like, having said this, you're like, good. It's not just this permanent accretion of surveillance that we're so used to in our life.
Well,
like, you accept cookies and now you deal with that for the rest of your life. It's like, no, like, donate some of your data for a couple of weeks, help us out, and then move freely through the world after that. And it just feels really nice when we can time bound it and when we can show people that that's the nature of the interaction here. It's not a permanently, I feel like a lot of these surveillance models are just permanent extraction, and here it's a temporary contribution, and it's just a lovely frame to bring into the consent discussion.
And two alternate stories of counterexamples. Uber famously had this God mode where they could just like turn on, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but sometimes you get tapped into that power, like I can see where everyone is. All my children are safe, and I know exactly what's happening, and I can help them because I am a benevolent, deity. We don't want that. That's patronizing, but
Would we say they
also,
were a benevolent god?
no, we are a mighty power of, I don't know. We are a absentee. We're like the Thor, drunk off of some ale, like fighting on some other plane and not caring for our, Midgard. That's what many tech companies end up being, and wielding a hammer and smashing stuff. But there's also, this is the case of Life 360 is another popular kind of family app for keeping track of your children and making sure they're safe and your family. Um, and that was, they plugged in some Facebook or some third-party analytics. It was just like leaking data left and right, personal data, children's data, location data. We've heard about reproductive apps for like tracking menstrual cycles, plugging into Facebook analytics, and that's connected with someone's Facebook profile. When you're getting into this level of kind of safety and privacy and working with communities who are already at risk, you just have to do things differently. And what was I going to say on the last piece here? Anyway, I will to just in time. Anyway, we'll talk more about that.
Was it
Losing
the
my train of thought.
Audacity story?
Oh, Audacity. Yes, that's a good one. And I've talked about this before. I am a big fan of Audacity, which is a free and open source software application for audio editing. We use it for our podcasts. And in that case, a few years ago, they were purchased, which is fine. You can make money from software, free software, open source. We're all here to make a living, and but the new company decided to drop in all sorts of measurement that was kind of not culturally compatible in the past around. It just was just like, here, like, let us track you. And what I was thinking, we talked about was, I'm happy to help make Audacity better. And there's a specific feature where I'm always annoyed when I try to export an MP3 for a podcast and the menu comes up for tagging and adding all the tags and metadata. And it's just poorly designed, and I get stuck there and it doesn't remember my previous tags. And if it said, it looks like you know, you're quitting this dialogue, like you're ending here a lot. Would you like to share data around this piece of the experience with us for a certain amount of time so that we can make this better? Yes, absolutely. Like, I have no problem, and I feel better that I'm engaged around a specific area. So a lot of this is just changing the compact, the connection, the covenant you have with your users and how you're engaging them around measurement. And then they feel more excited about it than less. So, all right.
Yeah.
So
Doing it contextually matters. I mean, I liken it to that, like you're hanging out with maybe a new friend, and you wouldn't walk up and go, "Hey, is it cool if I take videos for the rest of the time that we're around? Do you accept my privacy policy?" And you're like, "Well, now I'm deeply uncomfortable." Whereas if you're like on a hike and you're like, "Hey, do you mind if I take a quick video of this particular context? Like, look at this vista. Here we are." You're gonna go like, "Yeah, sure. Like, of course." And those are just so different, right? Like, do it in the right context. Ask at the right time. But when you meet somebody like, "Do you accept my terms of service?" Like, it should make you feel a little uncomfortable. Avoid that.
So I don't know if this is just we've talked through these things before, and these are just some more detailed um, cases. Obviously, the repurposing around analytics, again, sensitive context and situation like mental health. This is a hotline for suicide prevention, was sharing data. We talked about Google in this case of identification of protesters based on metadata, location data they were storing. What is this case with the UK data regulator? I think I need you
Okay,
to
so these
unpack this.
pictures, the picture and the line are unfortunately not super related.
Okay.
But
This
I just
box
throw
came up earlier.
I'll put this out. I'm a person who works on analytics, and I'm also a person who runs a tracker blocker. And that's kind of a weird thing at first. And then you realize, like, hey, I care about privacy. Like, I'm not here to give it all away. As an industry, we've gotten to the point that we become a thing that people want to categorically block. And we get to the point that the kind of consent that folks end up seeking is the kind of thing that people are either giving just because, like, get out of my way, or not. And what that image is the UK's office that was giving advice on how to set this up and how to seek consent and how to do all these things, was so invasive and so put such a bad taste in people's mouth that 90% of people said, I don't even want to be a part of this anymore. And I think by being better citizens and phrasing this as contributing, where you can honestly say that it is, that it's time bound, things like this, you're bringing people in rather than causing them to find a way to throw you out. And what they saw was that 90% of people had opted out of their, I would say, uninspired model of extractive analytics and consent. And I think we can do better as an industry. So you not only get that better data because you asked the question you actually want the answer to, you got it because you stopped turning it into, I think we as a group, and I think Matomo folks are on the leading edge of this because they're already thinking about how to do analytics that isn't shipping it off to a third party, so that it can be fed into the advertising machines more to begin with, right? Like this is a group that's thinking about that. If we can set the right example, more people will want to play along, and we'll learn more, and we'll all build better things and live happier lives.
So on that point, like you said, I mean, Matomo already, as a product and community, is aligned with much of what we're saying and already has features, a lot of great features that you can set. Now, these aren't always on by default, right?
No, a bunch of these are options.
Yeah.
But the real question, I had first titled the slide, Matomo's private, right? And it's the wrong question.
Right.
It's
right.
People in the security world are used to asking, like, secure from what? For whom? Right? There is this devastating interview with Michael Hayden, who used to be the head of the CIA and the NSA. Very smart guy. And he was talking about the debate over whether the government should try to crack encryption or backdoor it or disallow it. And he said, well, we were all really worried about everybody, all the bad guys going dark. And then we discovered metadata. And more or less goes on to say, dude, it doesn't even matter what they're saying anymore. I can see everyone. I can see who talks to who. The game is all over. We're in the golden age of surveillance. And this is a guy who is doing it on purpose, right? And so the question becomes, what is private from whom? Because if your content is private, but who you talk to is not, and the CIA is looking over your shoulder, that may not be very comforting. And so this is that question of what is private from whom, right? Matomo is private in a lot of ways. It might be right for your use case, but it's just one way of being private. And there are other ones out there that it doesn't do out of the box. And so you got to think about, who are my users and what are they really worried about? What are they not worried about?
And this is, I was reminded of when people ask me to help them. Oh, it's increasingly less and less, but can you help me make my Windows like more secure? Or like something's, I'm worried about spyware and things. So what I used to always do is go into the Windows service panel and just like turn off and disable everything, like stop everything. If you don't know what it is, and then as long as everything keeps working as you expect, it's okay to turn it off. And I think if you can go in and try locking down, every potential way of locking down and limiting your Matomo instance, and then basically seeing like, oh, is this still working? Is this still enough for me? Versus like, oh, let me just try one thing. So a lot of this is to say, let's just look at everything, do an experiment, try really locking things down and seeing what value you still get. But as you say, John, it's not enough always for everything what you get out of the box. And so I think, this point about compliance is excellent. And that's kind of the design, the threat model is a lawyer, often with Matomo, which is, and much respect to all of the work done in the EU and California and other places that are pioneering more of these kinds of policies. But this idea of, there's some things that no one should know and that shouldn't exist in a file on your disk or a database that, can be exfiltrated. And there's this cool image from the only good Batman movie or movie series, a movie, where the tech genius behind the cowl, behind the man in the mask, talks to Batman. What does he do? They realize they have this special capability and they can use it for good all of a sudden, right? Is that what happens?
Yeah. A little bit ahead of its time. Now I think we all believe all the phones are listening. Turns all the microphones of all the phones in Gotham into a surveillance device to find the baddies.
Into a bad guy detector device, right? Into a bat phone that is only for stopping bad guys.
And here's this tech guy looking at him. And I think that I wish I had written the lines down here, although I will better that I didn't, because I could not deliver them with one modicum
I
of
can't do the voice.
the gravitas. But no man should have this much power.
No man should have this power.
Yeah. I don't care. Like, and I mean this. I don't care if you, the fine human being listening to this talk, I don't care if you are Batman. There is some data and some things to measure that, no matter how well intentioned you are, is a bad idea to be keeping around. It's toxic. And the storyline of this movie is like, this kind of power rots and corrupts, and if it falls into the wrong hands, it's a nightmare. And it's all these things like, we don't need that. We don't. We're not actually trying to get the Joker in Gotham City here. We can ask and answer the questions we want and keep it private without turning every phone into a surveillance device.
So and we're getting long on time, so I'm gonna move forward a little more quickly. But we've gone through most of what we wanted to say. We're not here to pitch you on a specific product, but to talk and have coffee and things. But we did think about Matomo and other back-end instances and approaches to measurement that, where you think you're private, but then anything where you can get into identity over time with sessions and timestamps and aggregation and volume of data, and consent is bad. All of these things are patterns we've seen even in kind of privacy-focused implementations, because again, the threat model of compliance doesn't necessarily stop this sort of approach. And so, we've talked about this actually already. There are cases we work where people actually want true anonymity. There's other cases of just legal compliance related to certain classes of user. So there's a variety of ways to think more in a more detailed way about privacy. There's a language and terminology, and when you want to get into, and we'll share these slides and happy talking about them. But this is a bit of the process we do of being like, what is your threat? What are you cared about? And in some cases, we are working with labor organizations in Europe, and they had multiple layers. They were worried about a subpoena from in a legal case, against an employer. They're worried about GDPR compliance. They're worried about a disgruntled employee or member using data against other people. They're worrying about, in our app itself, it had the ability to track your location when you were at work, when you weren't at work, where you were going, and that was for the user themselves to use in work, workplace and employer-employee negotiation. But that was a threat because, again, it was an additional place that data was being tracked. So it's good to think through these. It's not always just one layer. And this gets us into, we've talked about this with the focus group model. We do have some thoughts on different user experiences for consent. We don't just call it opt-in, but this kind of bounded, time-bounded, data-bounded focus questions that engage your community in co-design, co-improvement in a way that helps them say, wow, that was worth it to me to share this piece of data in this time. John, I know I'm jumping ahead quickly, but on those last few slides, any thoughts?
I mean, the ask a different question is, you come in and you say, can I track you? And that's a heartbreaker. Find out a way to co-develop what you're working on. People want to contribute, even if you're in a commercial setting where you're like, oh, maybe this isn't open source. The thing that people want to be able to do, they all use your product. They want something better. I mean, you heard Nathan talk about the Audacity case. It's like, hey, everything I use, I can tell you at least one thing that's broken about it that I really wish the developers would see. Speak to your users like they're people and talk to them about how this really is a collaborative endeavor. They're going to want to be a part of it. You know, look at the language in there. It wasn't, can we track? It was like, do you want to contribute? Together we can. Ask a different question. Don't say, can I track you? Can I put a cookie on your machine? Do better and find that context that matters to your users.
In the case of, I think early on you mentioned, we do work with news organizations who want to know, like, are users from Russia reaching my news site? Are they able to get to me? And those users, in a kind of very censored, surveilled place, don't necessarily want to be tracked more. But the idea that let the news organization know that you're reaching them, that you are in fact able to read their news from behind a firewall, through a VPN, through Tor, through a proxy, right? So there's things where both sides benefit because that helps the news organization say, yes, good, I'm doing something. I'm reaching someone in this area, as opposed to, tell me what this user in this city and this IP on this phone exactly likes to do every morning when they read the news. So Clean Insights is, and in our last minutes here, we have an approach. We do have some technology. We do have some design guides, case studies. All of this is at cleaninsights.org. I think we've talked about this today, and tea and coffee. So you can come and talk to us three ways if you want to talk more. cleaninsights.org/coffee or /beans, cleaninsights.org/tea, Clean Insights tea, the blue label. This is Nepali silver needle tea. Very good. And cleaninsights.org/toxic. So depending on, do you want to have some coffee with us? We'll send you some beans. We'll brew it up together. Tea, same thing. We'll talk more. Toxic is our new Toxic.
That's where we put on Britney Spears' 1999 smash hit, Toxic, right?
Or with the Toxic Avenger, great film. The Toxic asset audit process we have to help you go through. And we'll talk through all of these things. We also have SDKs. We have an alternative SDK and measurement proxy, we call it, for Matomo, that you can implement in your mobile app, in your website. I almost had a data leak here with my coffee on my keyboard. And we have case studies. So it works with Matomo. We use that as our backend. The data that comes in, the way it looks, is quite different. We have partners that use the standard Matomo SDK for their main web traffic, but then in their actual privacy-focused app, they then use Clean Insights SDK in their app, but they combine these through a single site or multiple sites within a Matomo instance. We also offer free Matomo hosting ourselves, as well as privacy-focused deployment configurations of Matomo. So we have a services team that can help people with that, as we've talked about. Beautiful beans. Here's the links. And I think we will wrap there because that's exactly on time. And I don't know if there's
some glamour shots of the tea, Nathan.
Huh? Do we have that?
We got to get some of these glamour shots of our tea.
Oh, I know. The tea images aren't very glamorous, but the tea, I can tell you, we have 5 varieties through our partners at Young Mountain Tea, which is ethically sourced, and all the proceeds go back to largely women farmers in South Asia that are, and similarly, we care about this stuff for real. We're not just buying random junk. So I don't know if there's any questions. You know how to reach us. We're here. Thank you again for the organizers, and keep on drinking good stuff. Sun has risen here, but it's cloudy. Well, no, yeah, just some blue sky. It's still dark there.
I can see just the famous bit of daylight on the horizon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John and Nathan. It was a lovely presentation. I think we do not have any questions in the chat at the moment, but of course everyone is free to write later if you want to. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us today, especially considering the time you started the day with us. So yeah, I wish you a good day ahead. Thank you.
Merci. Gracias. All of these wonderful things. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.